The first shot rang out before the sun had even cleared the horizon, echoing across the canyon like a gun-metal scream, and for a moment, Mara Stedman felt as though the world had stopped just for her. Mara, a woman of 30, rugged and sharp-eyed, crouched behind a jagged boulder, her hands trembling not from fear but from the shock of recognition. The man advancing toward the burned-down barn was not just any outlaw. It was Lane Callahan, the man she had once loved, the man who had promised to carve out a life with her and then vanished for reasons she still did not understand. The dry wind carried the acrid scent of charred wood and gunpowder, and it mingled with the dusty tang of the canyon earth. Mara's chest tightened with a familiar ache. Betrayal, the kind that burrows deep enough to twist your insides into barbed wire. She had come to Ridgewood seeking peace. After years of running small saloons, repairing broken fences, and nursing wounds that were more emotional than physical, she had finally bought a modest cabin on the edge of town. It was quiet, lonely at times, but safe. That peace had shattered the moment she saw Lane ride in on horseback, coat dusty, eyes hard, and a six-shooter at his hip. "Lane?" she hissed under her breath, her voice cracking slightly. Her fingers tightened around the old Winchester she had inherited from her father. She had promised herself she would never touch it again, but necessity had a way of resurrecting old habits. Lane didn't recognize her, or perhaps he was pretending not to. His jaw clenched as he scanned the ruins, and Mara noticed a subtle hesitation in his movements. He wasn't just a man returning to town. He was a man hunting something or someone. Mara's mind raced back to the last night she had seen him. The night he had whispered, "I have to leave. Mara, I'll make this right someday. But you can't wait for me." She had begged, pleaded, cursed, but he had gone, leaving her with a gnawing emptiness she carried like a shadow. Now he was here, and every instinct screamed that nothing would be the same again. The town of Ridgewood was beginning to stir. A blacksmith struck iron on the far side of the main street, the clang ringing hollow against the morning stillness. A few stray horses whinnied in the distance. Mara knew she couldn't confront him in the open. Lane had always been reckless when cornered, and she couldn't risk a gunfight that would destroy everything she had painstakingly built. She ducked lower, observing Lane as he approached the barn. Smoke spiraled from the ruin, curling into the sky like phantom fingers. Mara's heart ached with memories, the nights they had spent under the stars, the plans they had whispered in the dark, the promises that now felt like shards in her chest. And then she saw it, his hand brushed over a small leather satchel, worn and patched, almost hidden beneath his coat. Mara's breath caught. Whatever Lane was after, it wasn't just the barn. That bag could be dangerous, deadly even. "Lane," she finally shouted, stepping out from behind the boulder, her voice carrying over the canyon. He froze, hand hovering near his gun. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't relief, it was wariness. "Mara," he said softly, almost a whisper. This isn't what you think." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Isn't what I think? Lane, you disappeared for years. Left me to run this town alone. And now you're back with that bag like nothing happened?" He flinched at her words but stepped closer. "I didn't disappear. I was trying to protect you, protect us from what's coming." Mara felt the old pull, the instinct to believe him, to forgive, but the fire in her belly refused. "Protect us? Or protect yourself?" "I spent years thinking I was the only one who mattered, Lane. I thought I knew you. And now I see I didn't know you at all." The air between them trembled with tension. Lane's eyes darted to the horizon, then back to her, and finally he sighed. "There's no time to explain everything now. I need that satchel. It's the only way to stop them." "Stop who?" she demanded, her voice cracking with both fury and fear. Lane's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Men from my past. Men who won't hesitate to burn this town and everyone in it just to get what I have. Mara's instincts screamed at her to run, to lock herself away, to pretend she had never seen him. But something deeper, years of shared history, trust, and heartbreak kept her rooted. She took a careful step closer. "And you expect me to help you? After everything?" He swallowed hard, his jaw tight. "I don't expect anything. But I can't do this alone." The wind picked up and dust swirled around them, stinging their eyes and filling their lungs. Mara's pulse raced as the canyon seemed to close in, echoing every shot, every memory, every betrayal. She knew Lane was dangerous, but so was the world they were about to face. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded once, reluctantly. "All right, Lane. But if this is another trick, if I get hurt because of you, I won't forgive you again." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and for a moment, the tension between them shifted not to comfort, but to uneasy alliance. "Then let's move," he said, glancing toward the horizon where the first hints of smoke from another fire painted the sky red. Mara hoisted her Winchester, squinting toward the canyon exit. She didn't know what awaited them. Bandits, revenge seekers, maybe death itself, but she knew one thing. She would not be left behind again. Not this time. As they mounted their horses and galloped into the canyon, the ruins of the barn disappeared behind them, leaving only smoke, ash, and memories. But Mara carried more than just memories. She carried the fire of betrayal and a fragile hope that this journey, whatever it held, might finally reveal the truth. Unseen from a ridge above, a shadow watched them, its face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf. Fingers rested lightly on the trigger of a rifle, and a low, menacing chuckle drifted on the wind. This was only the beginning. The sun had climbed higher over Ridgewood, burning away the early morning mist and illuminating the canyon in a harsh golden light. Mara's horse's hooves pounded against the dry earth as she and Lane raced through the narrow trails, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Lane rode with a tense, urgent precision, eyes constantly scanning the horizon, muscles coiled like a predator. She tried to read him, but after years of uncertainty, she wasn't sure she could. "Lane," she called over the wind, her voice sharp. "Stop, I need answers." Lane didn't slow. His gaze never left the canyon entrance ahead. "Not yet," he said, voice clipped. "We have to reach the mesa before they notice the trail." Mara's chest tightened. "They?" Her words came out as a whisper, half accusation, half fear. Lane's jaw stiffened. "Men from my past. They want the satchel. And Mara. If they get it, everyone in Ridgewood is in danger." The weight of his words pressed down on her like the sun beating on the canyon. She hated how quickly fear had begun to coil in her stomach, how quickly she wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand he explain, to call him a liar, but there was something in his eyes, a haunted desperation she remembered from long ago, that made her hesitate. Hours passed, the landscape blurring in shades of ochre and brown, dotted with scrub and twisted juniper. Mara rode in silence, side by side with Lane, as the canyon walls gradually opened to reveal the vast expanse of the high desert. The mesa stood ahead, a plateau that jutted skyward like a jagged tooth. Lane guided her toward a narrow path, barely visible, that wound precariously along the cliffside. "You sure about this?" Mara asked, voice tense. "One wrong step and we're done." Lane's lips twitched into a faint, grim smile. "Better dead than caught." Mara's heart stuttered. Better dead than caught. Who were they really running from? And why had Lane come back now after all these years? The trail grew narrower, the wind sharper, cutting at their faces and clothes. Mara's fingers were white around the reins, her mind racing with memories of the life she had tried to rebuild. Her cabin, her modest shop, the quiet days she had carved out for herself, all of it felt fragile now. Threatened by Lane's sudden return and the shadow of danger that seemed to follow him at the base of the mesa, Lane slowed his horse and dismounted. Mara followed suit, letting her mount graze on the sparse scrub. He crouched near a cluster of rocks, pulling out the satchel and checking its contents. Mara stayed behind him, keeping her Winchester close, every muscle alert. "What is it?" she asked, unable to contain herself any longer. Lane looked up at her, his eyes shadowed. "Maps, letters, contracts. Things that tie me to men I once trusted. But they're dangerous. They want everything I know and me too." Mara's pulse quickened. "Dangerous men? You mean outlaws?" Lane shook his head. "Worse, men who hide in plain sight. Lawyers, bankers, town officials. They'll kill without a second thought if they think the satchel is mine." She blinked, the canyon light catching the sharp planes of his face. Mara had always been drawn to danger, but this was different. This was a storm she couldn't control. "Why now? Why come back to Ridgewood?" Lane's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and determination. "Because you're the only one I trust to help me. And because I can't do it without you." Mara's chest tightened, and she felt a flicker of anger. "After leaving me for years? After making me think I was nothing to you? And now I'm supposed to trust you?" Lane swallowed hard, as if her words hurt him more than he wanted to admit. "I know I don't deserve it, Mara. I thought leaving was the only way to keep you safe. But I was wrong. Everything I tried to protect ended up hurting you instead." The wind shifted, and Mara felt it in her bones. They weren't alone. The rustle of dry brush, faint but deliberate, caught her attention. She motioned to Lane, and he immediately stiffened. The satchel was heavier than it looked, its weight a constant reminder of the danger they carried. "They're close," Lane whispered, eyes scanning the desert. "We need to move now." Mara's instincts kicked in, honed from years of surviving on the fringes of lawless towns. "Which way?" He pointed toward a narrow crevice in the mesa, hidden from plain sight. "Through there. If we can get to the cave, we'll have cover and time to figure out our next move." They rode cautiously, the crevice narrowing until the horses could barely squeeze through. Mara's heart pounded, every sense alert. Dust rose in thin clouds, clinging to their clothes, and the heat of the desert pressed down on them like a living thing. The sound of distant footsteps and low voices reached her ears, and she knew they were being followed. Once inside the cave, Lane dismounted and secured the horses to a rock outcrop. Mara followed him deeper into the shadowy hollow, where the air was cooler and the sunlight barely touched the walls. He set the satchel down and opened it again, sorting through the contents with meticulous care. "You need to rest," Mara said finally, breaking the tense silence. "We can't keep running blind." "We need a plan." Lane shook his head. "We don't have time. They're relentless. If we wait too long, they'll find us in Ridgewood with them." Mara's hands clenched at her sides. "So we fight? We hide? What exactly is your plan, Lane?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crack. "I need you to trust me, Mara. I need your help to get this satchel to safety. And I need to know that if it comes down to it, you'll stand with me." The words cut through her like a knife. Mara's past had taught her to trust no one, and yet the fire in her chest refused to let her walk away. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, voice barely more than a whisper. "But I'm not walking away either." The cave grew quieter as they prepared, each sound outside amplified by the hollow rock. The footsteps had slowed, as if their pursuers were sensing the trap. Lane loaded his revolver, his hand steady despite the tension, while Mara adjusted her Winchester, her gaze flicking toward the cave entrance. Hours passed, and the sun began its slow descent. Shadows stretched across the desert floor, turning the landscape into a mix of gold and black. Mara and Lane kept watch, their silence heavy with unspoken questions, with regrets, with the fragile possibility of reconciliation. Suddenly, a shout rang from outside. Mara's pulse leapt, and Lane moved instinctively to the entrance, peering out. 3 figures were advancing cautiously, rifles raised. Mara's instincts screamed at her to fire, to protect, to survive. Lane motioned for silence. "Let me handle this," he whispered. "Follow my lead." The men hesitated at the cave entrance, trying to gauge if the mesa was occupied. Lane stepped out, hands empty but confident, his presence commanding. Mara stayed behind, hard hammering, ready to act if needed. "Lane Callahan," one of the men barked. "Hand over the satchel, and maybe we let the girl walk." Lane's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "You'll have to take it from me." A tense standoff unfolded in the fading light, the desert holding its breath. Mara realized that the man she had loved, the man who had betrayed her, was also the man who could protect her and perhaps even herself. When the first shot rang out, it wasn't aimed at Lane. Mara's instincts took over, and she fired into the brush, forcing the men to scatter. The dust and dirt exploded around them, the smell of gunpowder thickened the air. Lane moved with precision, covering her, and together they fought their way back into the cave. Breathless and shaken, Mara looked at him. "We're not done yet," she said, voice trembling with adrenaline. Lane shook his head, a grim acknowledgement. "No, but we're alive. That counts for something." In the shadows of the cave, with the satchel between them and the desert wind howling outside, Mara felt the fragile threads of trust begin to weave again. The path ahead was dangerous, filled with betrayal, greed, and hidden enemies, but for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't facing it alone. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the desert sky into a blaze of red and gold, Mara understood that this journey would test everything she believed about love, loyalty, and survival. The fire of betrayal had not been extinguished, it burned still, but now it burned alongside something else, the fierce, undeniable spark of hope. Night fell over the high desert like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The stars sharp and cold above the mesa. Mara shivered, not from the chill, but from the weight of everything they were carrying: fear, memories, and the satchel whose contents seemed to hold the fate of more than just their lives. Lane had barricaded the narrow cave entrance with rocks and scrub, leaving just enough space for them to watch the horizon, but the darkness outside made it impossible to know if they were truly safe. "Why did they come after you?" Mara finally asked, her voice low, almost swallowed by the cave. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her body tense and her thoughts racing. Lane leaned back against the stone wall, his silhouette sharp in the dim firelight. "Because I knew things I shouldn't have," he said quietly. "Information that could ruin men in power. Men who don't care who they hurt to protect themselves." Mara clenched her fists. "And you just walked away? Left me to handle a life without you?" He flinched at her words, guilt evident in the hard line of his jaw. "I thought leaving would keep you safe. I had no idea they'd follow me here. I had no idea the consequences would reach Ridgewood." She looked away, staring at the fire's flickering glow. Her chest ached, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the years he had been gone. Nights spent wondering if he was alive. Days of building a life with a hole where love had been. And now here he was, back in her life, carrying secrets and danger like a shadow she couldn't escape. The sound of the wind in the canyon shifted, and Mara's instincts screamed that they were being watched. She grabbed her Winchester and peered into the darkness. Lane followed her gaze, his hand resting lightly on his revolver. "Someone's out there," she said. He nodded. "I know. They're circling, waiting for us to make a mistake." The tension in the cave was palpable. Mara realized how fragile their safety was, how one wrong move could mean the end. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, a trap, an ambush, a betrayal. And yet, despite the fear, she couldn't deny the strange pull Lane still had over her, the memory of the man. He had been before the lies and the disappearance. Suddenly, a whisper of movement outside made both of them freeze. Mara's heart pounded as she signaled for Lane to stay still. Footsteps approached the cave cautiously, soft but deliberate, crunching the gravel. A voice called from the shadows, "Lane Callahan." Lane's eyes narrowed. "They found us." Mara gritted her teeth. "Who is it?" A figure stepped into the firelight at the cave's entrance. A tall man with a wide-brimmed hat, face partially hidden by a scarf. His hands rested on a rifle slung across his chest. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice calm but menacing. "Hand over the satchel. We can all walk away." Lane shook his head, his eyes darkening. "You've had your chance." The man laughed softly. "Chance? You abandoned everything to protect it. And now you expect her to help you? How noble." Mara's stomach twisted. She realized with a jolt that this man wasn't just an enemy to Lane, he represented all the things that had torn them apart. Lies, betrayal, power. And he knew Lane well. "Too well. You know him?" Mara asked, voice tight. Lane's expression was grim. "From before? He's the reason I left. He's the reason so many lives were in danger. I thought I could disappear, keep everyone safe, but he's persistent. And cruel." The man stepped closer, rifle leveled. "Step aside, Callahan. Give me the satchel, and I might just let her walk away." Mara's chest heaved. Her fingers tightened around the Winchester. She had made a choice. She wasn't walking away from this. Not again. Not from Lane, not from the life she had fought to keep. "Over my dead body," she said. Lane's jaw tightened, a shadow of a smile flickering across his face. "I like her spirit." The man sneered and fired, the bullet whistling past Lane and embedding itself in the rock beside Mara. She ducked instinctively, firing in response. Dust and pebbles exploded into the air, the firelight casting chaotic shadows across the cave walls. Lane moved with fluid precision, drawing his revolver and returning fire. Each shot deliberate, aimed. Mara's heart pounded as the standoff escalated. The desert wind carried the sharp smell of gunpowder, and the echoes of the shots ricocheted off the canyon walls. Her mind raced, what if more were coming? What if Ridgewood was already in danger? The tall man cursed and backed away slightly, reassessing. "This isn't over," he shouted before retreating into the shadows. Mara sank against the rock wall, breath ragged, pulse hammering. Lane moved toward her, checking that she wasn't hurt. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, though her hands trembled. "I will be, but this is bigger than either of us realized." Lane closed the satchel, securing it tightly. "We need to move. They'll regroup, and next time they won't hesitate." Mara followed him deeper into the cave, where the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly. She watched him closely. Every motion, every glance, told her how much this man carried. The guilt, the secrets, the fear. And she realized that despite the pain he had caused her, despite the years of absence, she still trusted him more than anyone else alive. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the wind outside and the occasional shuffle of rocks. Finally, Lane spoke. "We can't stay here. We need to reach the hidden creek beyond the mesa. It's the only place they won't think to follow." Mara nodded. "Lead the way." They emerged from the cave under the cover of darkness, the desert cool against their skin. The stars glittered above, indifferent to the struggles below. Lane guided her along a narrow path that twisted along the cliff's edge, the satchel heavy against his chest. Every step was careful, deliberate. Every shadow could hide a threat. Mara's mind drifted to the past, to the life they had once shared, to the nights under the stars when they had dreamed of a future together. She hated that she still remembered, hated that she still felt the pull of what had been. And yet, as she watched Lane move with focus and determination, she realized something terrifying. She had never stopped caring. God, by dawn, they reached the hidden creek. A small oasis tucked between rock formations, its waters clear and cold. Lane knelt to refill their canteens while Mara scouted the perimeter, making sure they weren't followed. As she crouched by the edge of the creek, she caught a reflection of herself in the water, dirt-smeared, exhausted, but alive. Alive and armed with a renewed determination. She realized that this journey was no longer just about survival, it was about reclaiming control over her life, about facing betrayal head-on, and about deciding once and for all who she would trust. Lane returned, sitting beside her, water dripping from his hands. "We rest here," he said, voice low. "No more movement until the sun is high. Then we figure out our next step." Mara nodded, letting herself relax slightly, though the tension never fully left her. "Next step?" she asked. He glanced at her, eyes softening. "We have to find out who's behind all this. And why. Only then can we end it for good." She met his gaze, the anger and uncertainty still there, but tempered by a fragile bond that had survived years of absence and betrayal. "And if we fail?" she asked quietly. Lane's hand brushed hers, a brief, fleeting contact that sent a jolt through her. "Then we fight," he said, "because walking away isn't an option anymore. Not for either of us." The sun rose slowly over the mesa, casting the desert in shades of gold and shadow. Mara and Lane sat in silence, knowing the path ahead would be treacherous. But for the first time in years, they faced it together, their past and present intertwined in ways neither could deny. The desert was vast, dangerous, and unforgiving. But so were they. And as the first light of day touched the creek's surface, Mara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. Not a naive hope, not the kind Lane had promised long ago, but a tempered, hard-earned hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive the storm, confront the betrayals, and reclaim their lives from the shadows of the past. Because this was no longer just about Lane. It was about Mara. About who she was and who she would become when the dust settled and the guns were silent. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of movement reminded them. Their enemies were out there, waiting, patient, and relentless. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but for now, at least, they had each other. The sun had burned high over the mesa for hours, relentless and merciless, baking the desert beneath its glare. Mara and Lane crouched behind a ridge, surveying the town of Ridgewood spread below them like a map. Smoke still spiraled from the burned barn, a stark reminder of the chaos that had followed Lane back to the place Mara had tried to call home. But the danger wasn't just behind them, it was in front of them. The men chasing Lane were organized, methodical, and ruthless. Mara knew that today would decide everything: life, death, betrayal, and maybe redemption. "We can't just storm in," Mara whispered, voice tight with tension. "They'll see us a mile off. Too many of them." Lane squinted at the town, the lines of worry etched into his face deepening. "No, we can't. But we can draw them out. They'll come to us if we make it look like the satchel is unguarded." Mara's stomach twisted. "A trap?" He nodded. "Exactly. But it's the only chance we have to end this without Ridgewood being destroyed." She exhaled slowly, trying to steady the shaking in her hands. Her mind went back over every step of their journey, the ambush at the cave, the chase through the canyon, the hidden creek where they had caught their breath. And through it all, she realized something that frightened her as much as it gave her strength. She was in this fight with Lane completely. The anger, the hurt, and the years of betrayal still lingered, but survival demanded trust. And after everything, she did trust him. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it." Lane gave a faint, grim smile. "You always did have a knack for making impossible decisions." Together they crept down the ridge, keeping to the shadows, moving with a careful, deliberate silence. Mara's Winchester was ready, her fingers steady despite the sweat clinging to her palms. Lane carried the satchel, the weight of it a constant reminder of everything at stake. The streets of Ridgewood were quiet now, but Mara knew the lull was deceptive. Danger was patient. It watched and waited. They reached the edge of town just as the first hint of afternoon. Heat shimmered above the sun-baked rooftops. Mara's eyes scanned every alley, every rooftop, every shadow. Her instincts screamed that they were being watched, and she knew they were. Lane moved with practiced caution, but she could sense his own tension. He wasn't just protecting the satchel. He was protecting her. Split? Mara whispered, glancing at him. Lane shook his head. "No, we stick together. Until this is over." The street stretched ahead like a gauntlet. Mara noticed the shopfront still intact, the wooden signs swing in the dry wind, but the emptiness of the town made the silence almost deafening. She could feel the eyes of unseen enemies on them, the same shadow from the cave stalking somewhere nearby, waiting for the perfect moment. Lane stopped suddenly, pressing a finger to his lips. Mara followed his gaze to the general store at the corner. The door swung slightly, as if someone had just passed through, leaving the air heavy with tension. "They're inside," Lane murmured. "Two at least. One's the tall man. The other, I don't know. But they're waiting." Mara's chest tightened. "So we lure them out?" Lane nodded. "We need them in the open. Once they come after us, we control the fight." They moved cautiously to a wooden platform near the center of town, leaving the satchel exposed under the scorching sun. Mara crouched behind a stack of crates, eyes trained on the street. Lane positioned himself near the satchel, hand hovering over his revolver. Minutes stretched like hours. And then the first figure emerged, the tall man from the cave, moving cautiously, eyes fixed on the satchel. Behind him, two more figures followed, rifles raised. Mara's stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Now?" Lane whispered. Mara sprang from her cover, firing the Winchester in a controlled, precise burst. Lane was beside her instantly, revolver drawn, covering her as the tall man dove behind a barrel. The battle erupted in a flurry of dust, gunfire, and shouting. Mara ducked behind a post, taking aim at the man with the rifle, while Lane moved fluidly between cover, firing with deadly accuracy. The town seemed to explode around them. The wooden signs splintered. Dust and debris filled the air, the heat of the desert pressing down like a living weight. Mara's hands moved almost on instinct, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Every movement counted. Every shot mattered. The tall man lunged, attempting to grab the satchel. Mara fired again, her bullet hitting him squarely in the shoulder. He went down with a curse, but Mara knew that wasn't the end. She glanced at Lane, who had disarmed one of the other men, sending him sprawling into the dirt. "Keep moving." Lane shouted. "We're not done yet." Mara nodded, letting herself flow with the chaos, letting years of pent-up anger and betrayal fuel her. The men were skilled, but they were predictable, their greed making them reckless. And for the first time, Mara realized how much she had changed. She was no longer the woman who had waited helplessly in Ridgewood. She was a fighter, sharp, cunning, and unafraid of danger. The final man, the one Mara hadn't yet accounted for, made a desperate move toward the satchel. Lane intercepted him with a fierce shove, sending him crashing into the wall. Mara stepped forward, firing one last shot that clipped his leg and sent him sprawling. Silence fell suddenly, broken only by their ragged breaths and the creaking of the town's wooden structures in the wind. Lane lowered his revolver, checking the satchel. Mara joined him, heart still hammering. "Is it over?" she asked. Lane nodded slowly, relief etched into his face. "For now. But we can't stay here. They'll regroup." Mara glanced around at the devastated street, at the splintered wood and scattered dust. "Ridgewood," she murmured. "I wanted peace here." Lane's hand brushed hers briefly. "And you'll have it. After we finish this?" Together they mounted their horses and rode toward the canyon, leaving the chaos of the town behind. Mara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, relief, grief, and a cautious spark of hope. She realized that the journey had changed her, that the betrayals, the dangers, the near-death experiences had forged her into someone stronger, someone capable of facing anything. They rode in silence for a while, the wind cutting through the canyon and carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. Mara watched Lane closely. He was still the man she had loved, the man who had left her, the man who had returned with secrets and danger. But she also saw something new: vulnerability, remorse, and a determination that mirrored her own. At a bend in the canyon, they stopped to rest. Mara dismounted, letting the horse graze while she leaned against a rock. Lane joined her, sitting on the ground, the satchel between them. "Why did you really leave?" Mara asked, voice soft but piercing. Lane sighed, his eyes on the satchel. "Because I thought I could protect you. I thought leaving was the only way to keep you safe from the men I had crossed. I was wrong. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." Mara's throat tightened. Years of waiting, of wondering. "You were gone, Lane. I learned to survive without you, but it wasn't easy." "And you expect forgiveness?" Lane's eyes met hers, filled with raw honesty. "I don't expect it. I'll earn it if you'll let me. But I had to come back, Mara. I had to try. For you, for Ridgewood, for us." Mara swallowed, her emotions a storm she couldn't control. The anger still lingered, but it was tempered by the reality of the man before her, the man who had risked everything, who had returned despite the danger, who had fought alongside her. Finally, she nodded, a tentative gesture, but enough to signal that some trust could be rebuilt. "All right," she said. "Let's finish this, and then we rebuild." Lane gave a faint, relieved smile. "Then let's move." They rode deeper into the canyon, the path winding and treacherous. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but Mara no longer felt fear. She felt focus, determination, and a strange sense of hope. The satchel was heavy, yes, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the choices they had made, the battles they had fought, and the trust they were beginning to forge again. Hours later, they reached a hidden valley, a secluded place far from prying eyes. Lane set the satchel down and carefully opened it, revealing documents, maps, and letters, evidence of the corruption and schemes that had driven the men after him. Mara studied them, realizing that the satchel was not just a burden, but a tool for justice. This could save Ridgewood," Mara whispered. Lane nodded. "And make the men who chased me answer for what they've done. We can stop this, together." Mara looked at him, the desert sun casting long shadows across his face. She saw the man she had loved, the man who had betrayed her, and the man who had returned to fight for her. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. "Yes," she said softly. "Together." The valley was quiet, the wind sweeping across the rocks and sage. For Mara and Lane, it was the beginning of something new, not just survival, but redemption, justice, and the fragile promise of a future they could build together. The betrayals of the past could not be erased, but they could be faced, understood, and finally left behind. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Mara knew one thing with certainty. The storm had passed. They had survived, they had fought, and they had chosen each other. Nothing, not betrayal, danger, or years of absence, could take that away. For the first time, Ridgewood and their lives felt like something they could truly call their own.